Hello. Hi. Hello. Gaze not at my dying plans. Gaze into my eyes, okay? Hello. Hi. 2021 is going to be the year that I will just read books that I think are perfect for me and that I think that I'm gonna love instead of reading books just because they're popular. There have been plenty books of which I kind of expected they wouldn't be for me, but that I read anyway because they got glowing reviews and I ended up disappointed by them. And there have also been quite some books that get very mixed reviews but that I loved anyway, and I wouldn't have experienced these books if I listened to those mixed reviews. I just want to go back to that time when you were a teenager and you could walk into a bookstore not having heard of any book ever, no ideas, just head empty on the reviews. You just pick out whatever YA dystopian sounds cool to you, and then you bring it home and then you love it because you picked out the book based on whether it sounds cool to you. And also probably because you're 17 and pretty easy to please. So I just kind of want to go to a bookstore, pick out a random book that I've never heard of, no preconceived notions of whatsoever, and just pick out something that sounds like it would really be my thing. And then after I've read it, then I'll take a look at the reviews to see if those reviews would have been helpful to know beforehand. This maybe also be an excuse to buy a new book. Maybe this will flop and I'll end up with a book that I absolutely don't like and I should have read the reviews for beforehand. Or maybe I will actually find a book that I love. I'm one step closer to my strategy into 2022 of only reading books that I think I will really like for me. Okay, let's go book shopping. So I am aware that what we are about to do could go wrong. I'm putting on my shoes. Actually, a few months back, I kind of did a similar thing where I was like, I just want to go to a bookstore and buy a book that I'd never heard of. And I bought this. I bought this Into the Crooked Place by Alexandra Christo, and I actually couldn't get into it at all to the point that I never finished this book. It wasn't bad. It just, let's just say I understood why I'd never heard of this book before. And I want to avoid that because I don't think that this is what's going to happen every time, okay? There are just two things we need to take care of. First of all, the synopsis needs to sound interesting to me specifically. Like, even if a book is maybe mediocre to a lot of people, if it just has a type of plot or certain tropes that I absolutely will die for, then I'm probably going to be one of those people that will absolutely love the book. So anything that is like fantasy, atmospheric, 20-something life drama, fairy tale-esque dark academia vibe, anything, I will probably like that. But of course, if the premise of a book is good, then it can still be disappointing in the execution, which I think is what happened with this book, which has an interesting premise, very Six of Crows-like, which is something that I like. But I think if only I'd read the first few pages and going off how vague the description on the back is, I could have probably known that this would not be a very good execution of such a cool concept. So I need to keep that in mind when we are in the bookstore browsing through these books. Okay, ready to go. Hello, voiceover time! So I went into the city to just drop by a few bookshops to see if I could find something that piqued my interest. I saw a lot of really beautiful covers, which of course first grabbed my interest. Also, a lot of pretty ugly covers. I don't know what it is with fantasy genre and this font, but I'm not a fan. This was also a super pretty cover, but I thought that the synopsis on the back, like many other books I saw, were very generic, very tropey, so I also didn't take a look at those. And here, what am I doing here? Oh yeah, for example, this was a book that sounded really cool, but then it turned out that it was the sequel. There are many books that only had the sequel and not the first book in the series, which is unfortunate. And then, this is just me looking at a bunch of books. Oh yeah, this was a book that I actually saw a few weeks before in the bookstore, and I almost got it because it sounded like the very typical fairy tale-esque atmospheric book that I really love. But then, back then, I actually looked up the reviews and they were pretty mixed, so I didn't buy it back then, which is kind of a shame, to be honest. But yeah, in the end, I ended up picking a good book, and I will probably show you in the next clip. Yes, here. Okay, bye. Hello, we have acquired a book. have succeeded. Like, I was actually pretty surprised the amount of books that I'd never heard of. But I chose one that really spoke to me. I'm genuinely really interested in reading this book. Okay, we gotta set up the vibe. Vibe? Oh, cute. Okay. So the book that I'm very excited to read is Mrs. Death. Miss Death. Yes, this book immediately spoke to me, not just because the cover is extremely beautiful, but also because the title is a pun. This story really sounds like the kind of whimsical, speculative fiction that is kind of my jam. The two first lines on the back of the book say, Mrs. Death has had enough. She is exhausted by her job and now seeks someone to unburden her conscience to. I love stories that kind of have a personification of something immaterial, something in nature, like here, Mrs. Death. This is the story of a character called a wolf who is going to write the memoir of Mrs. Death, and they have conversations about her life as Mrs. Death and her experience and how she's kind of over it. And I think that is such a cool concept. So the first thing, premise, yes. That sounds amazing. Honestly, this really sounds like my kind of jam. And then the second thing is, of course, is it gonna be well executed? That is, of course, always the question. But I have faith in this one because, first and foremost, it is shortlisted for the Gordon Byrne Prize, full of like blurbs from other people and authors and The Guardian and Idris Elba. I'm thinking that must mean that there is at least some merit to this book, and apparently the author is, according to her author bio, one of Britain's best-loved poets and performers. So, British people watching, is that true? But another thing that really spoke to me is that this book is half in verse and half just story. And apparently, the author, Selena Godin, is a poet, and this is her first full-length novel. Okay, so now I'm just gonna take my time reading this book, and I hope I'm going to enjoy it. When you're not sure the book you're reading, the English book that you're reading, is British or from the US. It's British. Hello! Time for a little Midway update. I have some thoughts about this book. First of all, this book is kind of different than what I expected based on this pretty cover, the fact that it's about the personification of death, that there's a lot of like poetry in it. I really expected it to be kind of atmospheric, folklorish, but instead this book really took me by surprise with how much of an ironic tone the book holds. Like, it's kind of funny at times. There's one of my favorite things so far is that there was this chapter completely from the perspective of a desk, and the desk was kind of funny. That moment when a desk is funnier than you are. And just the whole book has a very cynical tone to it, kind of poking fun at the horrors of the world as, I think, like a way of coping. But what I really like is that this book also deals with a lot with mental illness. Mrs. Death is very much disillusioned with the world and all its catastrophes, and it's about how she deals with it, how another character named Wolf deals with it. It's one of those using humor to cope with bad situations kind of story. I will admit that I am personally more of a fan of books with a more serious tone and a more dark tone instead of more ironic type of books. It just tends to not really be my thing. But I think a lot of people do really like that, and then I would say that this book is doing a pretty good job at that. This book has a lot of very interesting takes, also about gender and race. Also the whole point that Mrs. Death is a woman, and she kind of mentioned how in any portrayal of death it is usually a man. Like every single folklore thing that most people can think of, death is portrayed as male. It's interesting to think about how culturally we just assign gender to so many things for absolutely no reason. And usually these kind of figures with a lot of power, like death, are given a male gender. Also, this book really pulled something on me. There's a scene where Mrs. Death is talking to her doctor, and she's telling her doctor about this whole thing about how people always expect that death is a man, etc. And I felt so stupid because that entire scene I was indeed imagining the doctor as a man, even though their gender was never stated. I felt kind of stupid when I was reading that. I was like, I can't believe I still make this mistake, just assuming that a random doctor is a man. So if you've read that book, please let me know if you were also gotcha'd by that scene, or if you were smarter than that. Yeah, that was my update. I will continue to read it. Once I finish it, I will check back with you whether I ended up enjoying it or not, and then we'll read some reviews to see if the reviews would have made me make a different decision when buying this book. Hello! Oh. I can actually hear the church bells ringing from here. Oh, I never actually noticed that. Anyway, I finished a book. I have opinions on it. As expected, this really wasn't what I expected. Well, it turns out if you don't read reviews before picking up a book, you kind of don't know what you're in for. Overall, I definitely had a good time. It's such an interesting way of looking at death, but not just death, also just the rest of life and other problems that exist in life, mostly because so many of the world's problems are tied to death. I really like this personification of death in Mrs. Death as a kind of cynical, done with the world person, while also delving into mental health. The more satirical tone of the book is something that I would never pick out myself, and I don't think it's really my thing. I think that's definitely what happened while picking up a book without reading the reviews, is that it made me step outside of my comfort zone without me realizing that I was about to step outside of my comfort zone. As someone who doesn't really like stepping outside of their comfort zone, not knowing that I'm about to do that is the best way to get me to step outside of that little circle. The writing is mixed with different styles of poetry. I will say, I will say I'm not really big on poetry, so I don't really know a lot about it, but this type of poetry didn't really do much for me personally. To be fair, the only other poetry that I've ever read and actually enjoyed was John Keats, which is very traditional, just sonnet style poems with like rhyme schemes and stuff, whereas this is more, it's just a lot more modern, a lot more freeform, like this. Now, I don't know a lot about poetry, so I'm completely just going off what it makes me feel like, and personally Gordon's poetry in this book didn't really make me feel something, so I guess that just wasn't my thing. But I'd be happy to hear what other people who've read this book who are also into poetry think of it, because I know that the author is apparently one of Britain's most loved poets. So anyway, I'm excited to see what the reviews of this book are. Let's take a look at that and then decide if I would have ever picked this book up if I read the reviews, or maybe my opinion of the book would be different. Oh, it's really not a popular book. It only has 2,000 ratings on Goodreads and an average rating of 3.6, which is kind of low for Goodreads, at least in my experience. The first review says, Godden writes of the tragedy and comedy of death. It's a rumination on death. Next person gave it 5 stars. Again, praising their poetic skills, writing skills. I really agree with what they say here. Be fair warned, this isn't always a nice and cozy story. These are discussions of real-life serial killers and their victims, which are graphic. They do not glamorize it, but remind the reader that it happened. The author also discusses mental health, BLM, police brutality, and racism. And I think it was very well done in the book. So many 4 and 5 stars in the top reviews. I think personally I would give it between 3 and 4 stars, so let's read a 3-star review. Solid premise, shaky execution, says this person. Okay. It appears that the reason this person didn't love the book is because they thought that it kind of just went downhill throughout the story, and that the author tried to do too much in such a short book. This is a little less than 300 pages. Okay, honestly, to be fair, I think if I opened Goodreads while in the bookstore looking at these reviews, that would 100% would have made me buy it even more, because it just gets glowing reviews, which is funny because the average rating is only 3.6, but all of the top reviews are 4 and 5 stars. Oh, here's a 1-star review. This person says this is not a novel, story, or even really a narrative of any kind. Yeah, it's more just one of those no plot, just vibes stories, but I tend to vibe with that. I think the intent that Godin meant was to make people appreciate being alive, but instead I just felt sad at how many people can tragically die, and the constant nagging reminder that we all die. I mean, I think that was the point of the story, right? I'm still reading a lot of reviews that are describing this as a very mystical, beautiful read, and I do think I have to disagree with that. The story really reads like a work of contemporary fiction. It just happens to be speculative. I think if there had been reviews that at least mentioned the more ironical tone of the book, or that, well, I guess there were quite a lot of reviews that mentioned that a lot of the stories in this book are just real life stories rooted in real life things that happened in real life, and therefore again are more like general non-genre fiction. If I'd known that beforehand, I may not have picked it up, which is interesting because I am happy that I did pick it up, and in that sense got out of my comfort zone. And I am usually not at all the kind of person that thinks you should only read books to like broaden your horizons or something. I am happy that by picking up this book I kind of stepped outside of my comfort zone and I guess broadened my book horizons, reading something that I might not usually read. Maybe we didn't take a step towards finding my new favorite book, but we definitely took a step sideways to exploring newer options, and I also really enjoyed that. I think anyone who is intrigued by the premise of this book and also knows that they enjoy general fiction and some poetry would really love this book, so I would recommend it. Conclusion of this experiment is that I don't think just picking up books that I've never heard about before is the way for me to find books that I'm going to love. Please let me know what you do. Are you someone who frequently walks into bookstores and just picks up something even if you don't know if it's gonna be good or not, just completely just something that you think you're gonna like? Or are you someone who, like me, kind of tends to religiously checks reviews before deciding to buy a book? Anyway, if you want to see more installments of, I guess, this kind of new series that we have of trying out different ways to find our new perfect favorite book, then don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any new videos. And you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter for general life stuff, and also Twitch for fun game content. I'm having a lot of fun on Twitch lately. I really hope you enjoyed watching this video, and I guess I will see you soon in another time, next week, depending on when you're watching this. I hope you have a wonderful day. Goodbye! Hello, voiceover time. So I went into the city. I went into the city, not into the titty.